Uh, Hi, everyone. This is the Poetry Center. This is our 7th event of spring 2021. We're really glad that you could join us tonight. Tonight, we're going to be hearing from Youmna Chlala and Chen. This program is supported by the National Endowment for the Arts. Youmna Chalala is a writer and artist from Beirut and based in New York. She's the author of the poetry collection, The Paper Camera, with writing appearing in Bomb, Guernica, Prairie Schooner, Bespoke, Asterix, Cura, and MIT Journal for Middle Eastern Studies. As an artist, she has exhibited at the Hayward Gallery, the Drawing Center, Rotterdam International Film Festival, Dubai Art Projects, Hessel Museum of Art, and Max Center for Art and Architecture, and participated in the 33rd Biennial de Sao Paulo, 7th LIAF Biennial in Norway, and the 11th Performa Biennial. She is co-editing a new series for Coffee House Press entitled Spatial Species, and is a professor in the Humanities and Media Studies and Writing departments at the Pratt Institute. Youmna?
Hi, thank you, Brent, for the introduction. How are you? Thank you so much to the Poetry Center, to Steve, to Elise, to Brent, to Trey, and to Molly for hosting us, for inviting us to read tonight. It is 10 at night in New York, and I hope to be as eloquent as possible. I had a book come out at the end of 2019 called The Paper Camera with Litmus Press. And it's a book of poetry. It's also a book of still images from a Super 8 film. The Super 8 film was called Notes on Leaving and Arriving. And part of the reason I wanted to use these kind of stilled moving images was to really get at the core emotional relationship I had not only with language but with the centripetal force of this book, which was Beirut. And having the book come out in 2019 meant that 2020 was supposed to be the year of fabulous book tours. So it's very apropos that the images are stilled, as were our lives. But in a lot of ways, the amount of change, crisis, and kind of intense transformation that's been going on in Beirut has really shifted my relationship with this book at different intervals since it came out. So what I'm going to do is read from a select few poems to give you a sense of the kind of drive of the work, but also we'll pause to say that a lot of this work was written at a time when people were really returning to Beirut consciously to kind of reinstigate home, a life, a kind of new vision. And we are currently experiencing a new type of loss, a new type of catastrophe, a new type of crisis that it's causing a lot of those same people to leave once again. And so the energy of these poems keeps shifting moods, as does the place. Beirut is absent. We swim, make dinner, roasted chicken and laughs at the sporting club. My cousin writes a long email about the traffic. Someone calls the embassy and begs to hang on to the Fanning helicopter moving towards Cyprus. It's still too hot in the summer. Cars rush up the mountain. Carpenter ants dig thin tunnels on branches before hieroglyphics, Gilgamesh and cedar forests, before heaven and hell. We read their marks and bet our own. The paths are dense, our shadow a vaguely yellow light. Stand in place. Wait, she says, I wish I could know what it will be like when the empire falls. Otherwise, she is quite polite. There's nowhere left to go. Your thumb keeps the page open, and I walk closer. Me surrender. Statues becoming. I lurch closer. Tiny noises like pop rocks move across the side of the train, ignite in your mouth. I am not far from electricity. You remain constant. Hold open. Why does anyone come to this country? Mouth, gap, fly trap, or stem of lights. A city is only as good as its satellite dishes, and yo te amo is a big, big word. I tell you as a seal moves slowly towards us, slick mass of muscle and a cartoon smile on the beach where buildings recede behind chlorinated pools. We're famished, eat sambusik and tabbouleh. You tear the lettuce leaves, give me the cœur. Say she who is heart will fight. Sand drags heavy from Beirut to Saida, pouring glass or time into stitched bags like pillows piled up for better viewing. Less sound, waiting for a wave through a checkpoint, for the sun to descend. I empty the sand. It piles onto the neighbor's balcony an aging plant, cigarette butts, and a bucket resined with soapy water submerged. I hang the thick canvas with wooden clips, little girls' barrettes. They dry stiff. Behind the billboard, 9 squares of thin wood set shadows smooth, leaving out the chipped walls whose fabric wore thread long ago. She presses a hand, steam flat against an ironed shirt. She doesn't notice the watermarks on her palm, no gloves, and dishes keep piling against the bleached sink dusted with broken glass. Even in daytime, the merchant's long metal grates are cranked down, aluminum wrapping the leftovers as the building facades itself into slogans. Our frames carved out by the ignited sky, caving in windows and doorways, erasing the long lines of slanted rooftops. Her foot arches when she steps on bits of stories. Her boots are too thick to know, too new. The blue shutters flap flat against the house. The deadened sound of clapping. Across, she leans her length against the cold metal. elbows tense. She's speaking to. On the verandas, symmetrical curls loosen themselves out to dry. I climbed holes that mimic mountainous grooves with small breaths. I squint in the bright gray light, looking for you, to lasso a rope around my waist, pull me up. But the rooftop is eaten away, like a slice of semolina cake, still dripping honey. My mouth opens unintentionally, dark in the window pane. What could have been an Egyptian armoire, a low table carved in Damascus, lovers fighting. Wires and nests grow underneath the 7 layers of a wedding cake, a sunken city, the building shaded by the twist of an oak tree. The economy is bad, she says. Do not return. There's nothing here for you. Columns made from shaved walls stand grinning between floors. Apartments once separating aunts from in-laws have joined the underwater archaeology of tangled seaweed, the algae green of what was. I believe in penicillin. It heals from the inside out. I reread this just this morning as I was thinking about what poems I would choose to read tonight. And it was really hard to read, actually, because it was written a long time ago, but it echoes very much what happened on August 4th with the explosion in Beirut, which was the biggest non-nuclear explosion humankind ever experienced. And the scale of it almost made, well, not almost, because of the scale of it, it's impossible to kind of place language near it. So all we can do is kind of look for language that once was, or look for a kind of speculative language that can try to imagine what happens next. So I'm going to read a couple of more poems from the book, and then read a poem that was written very much in a kind of speculative spirit. Recollect everything. Comments on memory lines, big gesturing hands. Puffy, you reel yourself in, we stand up, the surge I feel when you recognize me. Light has no other function than to emanate. Spaces like dismembered limbs, outside branches are hanging by threads, red, toppled, dirt, the salt, the earth. That night, a hunter moon. The almanac suggests fattening the deer on the beach, years ago, a carcass. These are the ghosts, what they smell like. 10,000 emergency phone calls. In Chungking Express, the 10,000 incomprehensible streets went on forever. I look it up. If each neuron connects to 10,000 others, then there is no difference between inside and out. The body is revived. Underwater, tunnels gasp for breath. Light flickers like gulps. So I'm going to switch modes a little and read from a piece that actually is connected to an art project called the Museum of Future Memories, which is a kind of ongoing installation work that I've been doing that mixes sculpture, text, various materials for different projects. But this one in particular is kind of speculating around the future of color and what our future color will be. And the impetus for this project was thinking about the horizon line and the disappearance of the horizon line. So if there is no way to see what the difference is between sea and sky, if we can no longer have a horizon line as a way to make sense of where we are, then what happens? And I began this project a few years ago, and it really led me to kind of think about how that works in translation and language, and also in our physical environment. So this piece is called How Many Tongues Does It Take to Make a Color? It was installed in the Lofoten Islands as language that someone kind of happens upon as they move through the spaces on these islands in Norway. And one of the central trade mechanisms for these islands is cod, and there's these beautiful racks where the cod's dry. And one of the things that happens each summer is teenagers are paid to pull the tongue out of the cod. And I loved that story so much that it led me to write this piece. What color is our future language? In the future, we will only see it as blue. It might be yours or mine. Either way, it will be blue, the color that never was. Long ago, we saw the sea as purple, in other parts a bright green. Ask anyone in Asia. Blue is new. The sky is a void and the sea can be orange. In the Museum of Future Memories, a certain kind of blue language blooms once a year. It's like those flowers who wait for the night to fall to grow without a glimpse. I found this fragment glowing bright. On my way to the moon, I fell in love with the sea. Sea tree, what do you see? I see the monstrous deep invasions, sea monsters, sky monsters. Do they make the waves, construct the cycles? Will the wind wind? Will the wind wind? The wind that smashes against rocks, dries tendrils and cheeks, suspends time, smash as we walk between stones. Suspended language is in a state of elongation, expanding life. If you dry the cod, it can last years, 10 or more. If the world is at the edge of sea and sky, then suspension is vital for survival or play. Play is a form of being. A being is a kind of species. We are species suspended in time and space, trying to remember to see language. Here, we cut tongues. Does this mean we remove the language of the fish? What about our own? Maybe our bodies have more to say than our tongues. Invasive species. You remind me that I am not from here. The future is the experience of migration, a kind of exchange. In the past, we traded reindeer for penguins. Our friendship is nations linked by cartoon animals. If a penguin is a bird, then how could it invade our yard? It was done away with. The reindeer still roam. Orca, herring, fin whale gather in winter. Fish are in constant motion. I watch them on the shark cam, online, free, anytime. The fish move fast and fluid in yellow blurs. Does the bright light of the camera agitate them, like a sun, making us restless? The water is murky. Do I believe it? The camera? I wait for the lights to flicker. In the sea, what happens below? Sea trees live. Wolf fish indicate the health of bottom dwellers, such as cod. If the cod is at the bottom and brought up to dry, then what is our dividing line? If the horizon line is not there, the red, the black, the lists of species below and above do not belong. They invade. If blue is the newest color, what is the oldest? We rub sand, coral, and soil. We try and remember red. The fish camera is frozen. All I see are black circles for eyes, seeing me back. The chalk vertebrae take longer to grow when the water contains more acid. Is chalk outside our color spectrum, like the sky? We took a long time to name it blue. Before, it was simply space, free of the weightiness of color. Without shrimp, there's no fish. Without fish, there's no us. I remember the first blue. Ink, poems, and language that is no longer mine. Once true, now wild. It takes a week to remove tentacles and spikes from sea urchins. I am left with a pink sphere dotted with bright white lines. Genetic structure appears to be strongly influenced by ocean current patterns. We study the shrimp and then we eat it. Once we amass language, it does not become whole, but retains its fragments. Its natural desire is to mutate. When the language blooms, it's dispersed, happy, thriving. The minds made the color. It was not found. We found it. It takes 12,000 shellfish to make 1.4 grams of tear purple. How many tongues does it take to make a color? How many seas until we see? Does color only happen as a kind of exchange? Collective? Is it like language? Is there no private color? If I hold the rock, does its rockness matter more than its color? To be is not to have a name. To name is to become. In the future, we will only have tongues. We will weave, eat, and preserve the tongues in hopes of preserving language. What does it mean to look for blue? Is it about prescience? The tapping into the possible, the not yet named or seen? If blue is the horizon of colors, will it appear infinitely? The blue screen is not the final frontier. Please tell me it is not the final frontier. We use to dye fabric. The dye is not permanent, ingested. It is healing against inflammation. We eat color to heal. Color is sacred because it takes time to grind, pull, dissolve, mix, and seal. Is language sacred? How many tongues can you pull out in a day? I will pay you. Blue is thought to be synthetic, invented. Is language the same? Sometimes it cannot be seen but needs a bright light to be made visible. Blue invites the light in. The light whisks away the unwanted, the murky. A blueprint is a map exposed to light. The guide is formed by markings and lines. We read it, we believe it. We believe it will come into being, to be built. Marking a paper with blue pencil makes it impossible to copy. Prints that have faded from prolonged exposure to light can be restored to their original tone by simply, temporarily storing them in a dark environment. I am caught in the algae. Looking for blue is a search for a future language. Will salt preserve us? Let me just check the time. Yeah, I think I will end here and let Ken continue on. Thank you so much.
Yeah, of course. Thank you, Youmna.
Yeah.
So I guess we'll turn it over to Ken. Let's see here. Ken Chen was the 2019 to 2020 Coleman Fellow at the New York Public Library, where he worked on his next book, Death Star. The book follows his journey to the underworld to rescue his father and his encounters there with those destroyed by colonialism. He was the 2009 winner of the Yale Series of Younger Poets Award for his book Juvenilia, selected by Louise Gluck. Chen served as the executive director of the Asian American Writers Workshop from 2008 to 2019 and co-founded the cultural website Arts and Letters Daily and Culture Strike, a national arts organization dedicated to migrant justice. A graduate of Yale Law School, he successfully defended the asylum application of an undocumented Muslim high school student from Guinea detained by Homeland Security. And let's see, Ken, whenever you're ready, you can come on.
Hello.
Hi.
How's it going?
Good, how are you?
Good. Sorry, I didn't mean to trap you in a dialogue. This is a funny reading because normally the point of poetry is it's so relational, but all of you people are like anonymized ghosts out there. So, you know, we can project or imagine, you know, who you could be. But I want to thank the Poetry Center and Steve, Elise, Molly, Trey, and Brent for having us. And I want to thank all of you for coming, especially those of you who are on the eastern side of the world, since it's very late at night. So to be honest, I don't really know what I'm doing or what I should read because one problem with this project is it's very, this book I'm working on is sort of never ending, but, and there's some gory stuff and there's some sad stuff. So you can consider yourself warned. But maybe I'll just read you the beginning of it and then I'll explain some more. So it's about my father passing away, as Brent said. So I'll read 2 paragraphs of something and then I'll jump in and explain a little bit more. In the beginning, in 2012, my father passed away and I began making regular visits to the underworld, which seemed polite. Like most people, I had not previously traveled to the underworld and hadn't really intended to visit more than once. What had happened, what had gone wrong, was my consciousness. In the beginning, in those early days of death, when my memories of my father saturated themselves through my body like a tranquilizer, I found myself thinking about him even when I slept. I do not really remember the dreams, if they were dreams, but I believe that the initial dreams simply replayed past experiences that my father and I shared. For example, my father and I eating lunch together, indoors, but alongside a wall of windows in a sunny restaurant near the California coast. I told this to a novelist friend who said that he had experienced similar dreams. In the beginning, he was devastated to see the one who he had lost. When time passed and the beginning had ended, these dreams would occasionally return and strike him out of nowhere, and he found himself gladdened. This was the only way he could see again the one who had died, a thwarting of death. I mentioned this in my eulogy for my father. Time poured by. Death became a fact. Death infiltrated my dreams with fact. My dreams would proceed as they had previously, but halfway through, my father would need to leave, would begin to move out of the apartment. He has never lived in an apartment. Would disappear around the corner, would forget about me, would have never been there at all. The narrative distorted itself to represent the abrupt rupture of grief. My consciousness had scrutinized what was happening and decided to correct it with the fact. In the beginning of this next chapter of dreams, I found myself inside a windowless gray room, deep inside a large state building, stationed across from my father, who sat on the opposite side of a visitation booth, an unbreakable window and telephone apparatus between us. And he must have been in jail, interned at the border between my nation and his nation. He was in immigration prison. He was a migrant held captive at the border of death. This was my first visit to the underworld. So I've been working on this book that's about my own travels to the underworld to rescue my father. And these are real dreams I had where we would be having dinner and then he would suddenly get up to leave. And each dream would escalate until he was finally in a completely different place, which was this sort of borderland at the perimeter of the underworld. And, that time he said, this time you're the one who needs to leave, because this is where I need to be. This is where I've immigrated to. And you're here without authorization. And you're an unauthorized migrant to death, and you should return to the land of the living. And so this was before the Trump administration. And I had been involved in migrant justice as a lawyer and, in a cultural way. But I also realized it was a way of writing about grief that was not purely personal, and something that could engage with something beyond me. Because if I could go to the underworld, then I could meet everyone else who had been sent there. And at the time, I would be reading books about the history of colonialism, the history of race, and I often recognize this sense of death energy, reading about like a famine in Bengal or something like that. And there was something familiar in that sense of grief. And I realized that I was writing about my own personal experience, but I was also writing about this thing that I've come to call sublime trauma, which is this experience of like the last 500 years of the world. And that sounds utterly insane. And that is the problem with this book, which is it's insane. And so part of the thing was it began out of a kind of political or ethical commitment against colonialism, which sounds absurd, but then it was also something that was personal and about feeling this sense of loss, but trying to deal with both things, but imagine my way out of it, as opposed to have something that was completely about pain or trauma or loss, but to use the vacancy of loss as a way to imagine something. So I think the idea of thinking about the underworld as this science fictional fantasy landscape where I could meet people from history was really generative for me, because instead of feeling like someone who could only chronicle my own sense of depletion, I could just invent this sort of world that is the lost world. So I'll read a little bit more. In the beginning, when I visited the underworld, I was ostensibly searching for my father, but I could rarely see his body. And so, in the beginning, I decided to look. I made my way across the highway and walked into the city to explore the necropolis, ostensibly searching, obviously failing my impossible quest. I found myself in a large stone building. The ground felt moist. You could smell urine. There were horses shitting within this temple, some bodies on the floor. In the beginning, I had come to Al-Azhar Mosque in Cairo. I had not come in a dream, but in a time machine did I come to Al-Azhar Mosque. When Napoleon shelled it and occupied it with his soldiers. Al-Azhar, where he executed a few sheikhs, married an Egyptian Muslim wife as proof of his new and supposed faith, a woman he killed after he fled Egypt, and where the French army and its horses pissed and shat in sanctified halls. This was not a dream. It really happened. This did not happen since I had not been there 200 years ago. This did not happen since I had imagined the architecture based on the Death Zone Tower in Doctor Who. I walked into another room in this museum mausoleum and saw growing from the stone floors a luscious grove, the oranges illuminating the room like lanterns. These were Jaffa oranges. They were here because the trees themselves had been cut down in the nation above. The nation above had been cut down in the nation above. Everything dies, land and places. Was the beginning over? I was now alone and did not know where in this place my father existed. Maybe this meant I was an adult because I was alone. But adults are not alone. They have families and friends and a community, and we call this citizenship. And I was here in a land where I did not belong, a place that I could be sent back from at any moment for existing without authorization. I was not authorized to be dead. I thought I would write a political history of ghosts, those starved from history, their bodies nearly transparent from the paltriness of their evidence. I found myself thinking of the ghost of Dante. His shades possess a static grandeur. They are dead as people and alive as ghosts. The refugees in the afterlife cannot develop because they are already extinct, and yet they can remember. So too could I kneel out of respect, brushing my hands on the ground, trying to hoard together some small heap of agency for the dearly departed. I could imagine the ghost as someone who is more than a victim, an inert object, pinned down by the descriptions of others. You do not need to know what a victim thinks, only that they suffer. But what if we can still encounter ghosts? In this encounter, they can share their testimony. They can desire. They can disagree with us and what we have to say about them. They can accompany us through the city of death, wending her way through the colonial city, not the flaneur, the ghost. And so in the beginning, I crept back and forth on all fours across the overpass of sticks. As in Bangkok, the Tartarus municipal authorities have paved asphalt over the rivers so the city can modernize and gentrify and sprawl. I wandered around the hutongs and favelas of the capital, an acropolis whose space I could navigate, but whose temporality I found glitched. Glitch as motion, glitch as stasis, death as migration, death as time travel. I am finding that my Underworld Guidebook is growing sentient and slowly becoming a book of spells. The Mika prophesied the end of the world, and they were right. The Europeans searched for Prester John's Christian kingdom in Africa. In the foreign legations of Beijing, the Boxer rebels found themselves struck down by bullets they thought magic would repel. As I scan the graffiti written on the walls of hell, I take a glance at colonialism and see a system held together by a desperate magic. In one alley in Hades, I spoke with a rebel from West Asia, who, when the British airdrop pamphlets, claimed that these were actually bombs he himself had transmuted into paper. I have not been able to find his name again. Walking, forgetting, walking the history planet, searching the Death Star, I find myself trying to recuperate my right to hallucinate. Pre-credit sequence for the film about the camp. You crawled back into your motel in a border town near the demarcation line between the nation state of the living and the underworld. Sleepless, you peered out the window. You could see the neon lights garlanding the gates of ivory and horn. The lights spelled out open 24 hours a day in blinking red cursive. You laughed. Of course, death is the only border crossing still open to all. You watched the illumination from the street pour onto the wall above your bed, a red lasso that looped on the wall, as if the wall had begun to bleed extravagantly. Below, traffic packed the road in both directions. From the two open gates, dreams sailed into the living world from over the deserts. Some dreams true, some false. You recognize some of these dreams, race, nation, gender, and you could not tell from which gate they had emerged. Sleepless, you saw the line of pilgrims queued up to enter the underworld. The line seems longer lately. New refugees to the afterlife. So some of these things I've been reading there sort of lay out the framework of what the project is about. But the thing that is weird about the project is it's about 10 million pages too long. And there's a way where I'm kind of burrowing away like a monastic termite in terms of just writing, trying to write the history of the world. So the book started out as a poetry collection, and then it became a memoir, it became a series of essays about politics and history. It then became kind of like a historical novel, and other times it's like a fantasy novel. And part of it is there is this sort of pedagogical motivation in the book, in that I feel like we're all foot soldiers of amnesia, in that we don't really know the real history of the world. And so I thought part of the point of the book would be to encounter these people, and then I would write little expositional essays to explain, like, you know, what happened, you know, in the New World, or what happened, you know, in trades across the Atlantic or the Pacific. You know, how did capitalism emerge? And the problem is that the book has this multiplicity and this heterogeneity where it's very hard to excerpt any of that, because I mean, probably most of it will get cut when the book finally gets published, but who knows? But I thought, you know, I would use this space, you know, knowing the Poetry Center is a more like experimental or like radical space, to kind of talk a little bit more about the process of the book and why I went in this direction. And that I feel like it was important for me to have a sense of a horizon to the project, kind of like what Youmna was saying, where it's not something that's close-ended, but imaginatively it could be expansive, and politically it can be expansive. So it was initiated by this sense of grief and outrage, reading about, you know, famines or genocide or atrocities that happened. But I realized that it didn't make sense to write from that point of view, because I wanted to write from the point of view of the agency of people from, you know, various places. So part of what I developed was this mode where I'm often encountering the ghosts of people from history. And I thought I had invented all of this until people I talked to would be like, oh, so it's like Dante, or you're like Orpheus. And I'm like, oh, I didn't invent going to the underworld. And so I think when I realized that I could do it invertedly, and, you know, I'm not like a Dante expert or like even really a fan, but the thing that's weird about Dante is it's like kind of, his stuff is like super kooky actually. And like there's a part where he rides on the back of a like mythological red dragon and like climbs on this dragon's butt and flies into the sky. And, you know, it's a very strange project in that you can have characters from mythology, people from the classical world, you know, fictional characters, historical characters, his contemporaries, people, his friends, and they all are together in the same world. And that in a way only makes sense because you have an organizing principle that postdates Dante, which is the idea of the West. And so they're all characters from something that we call the West. And so in a way, this project is like the opposite of that, in that who are characters that you could meet if it had all the people who are in the rest of the world. And so I thought I'd talk about some of those characters, and that the book starts in this sort of like late 1700s, early 1800s moment of this moment of imperialism. And so some of the characters are like Tipu Sultan, who is kind of the last state in South Asia to hold out against the British. There's a lot of stuff in Haiti and the Haitian Revolution, and I encountered Dessalines, who's the first ruler of Haiti, but he's actually kind of like the myths of Osiris or Dionysus, and that he is famously dismembered. And there's like a song that's from Haitian voodoo that's about his power coming from being dismembered. And I arrive in the scene that I read of going to this moment of Napoleon invading Egypt, which is like the first Western encounter of the Orient in this time period. And my guide is Al-Jabardi, who's this this historian who was in Egypt at the time, recounting what was happening and kind of writing this political economic history in real time, and often making fun of the French for their like bad grammar and their like boorish manners. And he becomes sort of like this cantankerous guide who's helping me reach the underworld to find my father. And I encounter my father, who says that he doesn't want to see me, and then I have to restart the whole voyage from the beginning of history. So then I go back 500 years and I meet Malinche, who's the translator of Cortez, and I encounter Kwa Ansa, who is the leader who is gives the Portuguese the control of the Mina coastline. And as I say this, I realize it's sounding even crazier than I'm thinking. So maybe I'll read maybe one or two more pieces and then stop. I'll just read excerpts of two things. So this is called Locate, and I think it's near the end of the book where I presumably find my dad. If all the dead exist in the underworld, does the underworld occur outside of time? What does that mean for your father? Through what magic will you locate your father, who has only just arrived, has only just departed, only just deported? Did you don a suit and loiter on the highway, your hands gripping a gilt-framed photograph of him? And what questions do you interview at all who passed, those vampires and angels you encountered? Can you state, for the record, the moan you heard the ghosts emit across the nation state? Wah-boo! Did you perform 3 miracles for a virile hag, a witch with universes for eyes? And did you request and barter a single boon, his location? Or did you unlock his key using a skeleton? Are we all a line assembled from white keys of death? And is this song the sonata we hear when we press those keys? Was your tool to search for him a wishbone? Did you slice the wishbone from the breast of a monstrous old god? Who was the god? What was his username? Was it one of the ghost giants you fled from, terrified that he may have glimpsed even a shred of you? Was it the famished god who grabs small ghosts to its mouth and slurps down their marrow? Was it a devourer whose fingerprints leak out red tears in hysterical shame? Was it Francisco Pizarro? Was it King Leopold? Did you see Joe Arpaio levitating, each leg borne aloft by flying police cars? Did you see Winston Churchill, that infant-faced feminist turning loose new emergencies? How did you kill the god? Is revolutionary politics the name for deicide? Or is it better to say that it is creating a god together, a god we know does not exist, that is the most radical act? You found a shadowless space where your father waited underneath a star. Is death the story of until? Is death the story you came to untell? Did the light emit a silence like shh? This light, the star wept. Was it a message from the past strewn across black heaven, an emergency beacon from a plagued universe, calling help, help from masters and money? Did the star halt above that house like a police chopper spotlight? Was this when the star's strange beams obliterated your shadow? Did you cry, no, please, my shadow is all I have here? Did you say, without my shadow, I am a ghost. Without my shadow, I have no history? How did you feel when the star cried and wailed down its weep light and fragile pink lineaments? Did you see the star throned above where your father may be waiting? Is your father the king who sleeps in a cave beneath the city? Or does his life continue in this mute house? Is he washing the dishes as we speak? Is he talking on the phone in that loud way of his? Is he watching a K-drama while eating Nuromian? Did he clip the soup's recipe from that most authentic of sources, Gourmet Magazine? Had you bought him the subscription for his birthday? And was his reply to you some months later, fine, his French can cook, but take away butter and they don't know how to do anything. Ha, 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 say the ghosts. Was that many years ago now? In fact, probably a decade. Did you just glance down at your wristwatch to show how many days are left in your very own life? Were you given this watch from your future self, that renegade Time Lord? Do you have the time? Is time something one can possess? Did you open the front door to the house and see the living room from your childhood? The white Nagahide couch, preserving the dark halo that he cast when he dozed off during his hair dye, the cubic light of a TV luminous solely from the VHF, and framed by the window, a blue Honda, car of his youth. These nostalgic recreations make you wonder if you had somehow time traveled to a coordinate outside of the underworld, traveled to the past, or would it be more accurate to say that we are already inside the underworld, that the apocalypse is not a spectacle, but what elapses as we speak? I thought I'd end on a more cheerful note. And one part that's the end of the book is I thought I had to write something that was not mourning people, but sort of praising or expressing some sense of devotion for people. So positive politics rather than like a negative politics, or positive poetry, not simply a reactive poetry. So the end of the book, I re-encounter al-Jabarti, the historian of Cairo, and he notes that I still haven't found my father. So he encourages me to pray for him. And then we discuss that that I'm a secular person. And he says, well, why don't you write a prayer for no God or a flag for no nation? So I thought I would just read the first page of this prayer for no God or a flag for no nation. May you mourners and the mourned feel me pouring you my love. O ghosts roaming beneath the mounds, and you who miss your ghosts. May you feel this light roaring toward you. See that puddle aspiring in the gutter, a miniature lake for the archivist. Don't you know rain only drops a data set from the ocean? The Americas moated by 2 bowls of unholy water offered to planet history. And then when I walked down Love Lane, I saw the wind harsh ridges into the alley's splash and crenulate that spill into fingerprints. My dear, may you brave the startlements of your loneliness. May we both. Remember that the self is a sphere. This vulnerable pearl is only a uvula that's accreted a silver glaze from the radiance of other people's love. You who read this, touch hungry, do you feel the skin I broadcast towards you like radiation? What is praxis but an act of love? Oh, how I thought I was good at love. I'd only been foraging in the dark, gleaning for warmth in the hollow. A prayer, not a spell, since resurrection impossible. No poetry sorceress enough to blow ashes into seeds. May this necromancy trampoline up the fathers, slumbering like a submarine, snug as a snail in hell's muggy channels. Yet let this delinquent song insurrect the other father, who is law, God, boss, state. Open your mouth, ululate, sing the heterodox litany. My prayer fluctuates because the light of insurgency redshifts as it flees the black hole swallowing galactic center. Against this lovely lexicon, our lovely Lux. Thank you.
Thanks, Ken. So at this point, we still have some time where we could talk to the poets and maybe answer some questions from the audience. But first, what about you guys? How do you feel right now? Are you super tired or what?
Answer the audience.
Yeah.
We're great. We're good. Yeah. We're energized by your trees.
Now that you've heard each other and listened to each other, and now that you're sitting next to each other, do you have any comments or questions? Maybe like things you never thought of before, but now that you've listened to each other, that maybe, you know, came up for you?
About the greater world or about each other?
You know, it's weird. We've never met before this night.
No, good. I don't know. Do you have a question?
We're just grateful that you've all showed up, and I think you know, as I said, it's weird to be in this setting because we're all communicating. So, you know, if any of you in the audience have questions, you know, this can be more of an exchange of reciprocity instead of us being like disembodied virtual signifiers in the neither world.
There's one question in here that came up earlier for Youmna. Where do you get your inspiration from?
That's a big question. I think maybe I'll answer that with form rather than inspiration. And I was thinking a lot. I mean, I get asked very often, like, how do you choose the form you use to make your work? Like, whether it's performance, sculpture, poetry, fiction. And I think, and I answer that it depends on the question. And I think the question that is to be asked demands different types of exploration or play to kind of arrive at something. But I think specifically like the way, I think I write poetry. I think I write poetry as a way to deal with grief, actually. And I think that's often what happens with verse, is it allows us to kind of find the small moments at which one word leads to another. And that's different than a narrative where you can kind of invent and move through space. I think so. My inspiration is internal in a lot of ways. It's when it comes to poetry in particular.
Do you want to talk about this? The Museum of Future Memories is sort of like a broader container where you can explore a lot of different ideas. Do you want to talk about any of the other things that you've done in that?
Yeah.
Or not, you don't have
no, I can. I mean, it's indirectly related. So I don't know, you have questions, so I can.
I just want to, Andrew Pagani complimented my hair, so I just thought I'd whip it out like a wallflower in a 90s romantic comedy. So you can see it's very long, but Sarah Riggs.
Andrew also had a question.
Oh, Andrew, how do you balance the research project with the poetry part of it? I think that's the problem that I'm dealing with, because in a way, it would have been better for me to have published this book a few years ago without having done very much research, where it was just very purely around the idea. Whereas now it's become this sort of like kudzu, encyclopedia kudzu or something, where it's just sort of like me reading a million books and like swarming. Like I got this fellowship at the New York Public Library where the librarians come and they bring books to your office. And so it, in a way, was the best and worst thing that could happen to me. And I actually found out that I broke the library system because I recall too many books and the whole room became like paneled with books. And so I think on the one hand, the history, the research is really important because it actually is very generative and it changes who I am and what I can think. But I think I need to often take a step back and be like a human being and be an artist. And so I think that's part of the challenge. I do find that I'm often gravitating towards like a kind of sense of pedagogy where I'm trying to recount something historically and kind of write a history of the world. But then other times it's more like I'm reading history as a form of science fiction. So I'm just reading about things in the past that are just so strange, but they're actually very central to like the history of the world. And that part, that ends up being a kind of imagination, like maybe it's like an aesthetic surrealism or something, in that it's very strange because it makes you rethink, it makes you realize you're already living in a parallel universe, but it's, I call it aesthetic, just improving now, because it's uninvented.
And also, I was wondering, at what point would you say you are at in the writing of your new work?
It's kind of like Zeno's paradox or something. I think I'm perpetually at like 95%, but I've been that way for several years. But I think I am almost done, but I think it will involve cutting a lot of things I've done already.
Okay, I see. How about this? I wanted to ask you both of afterworlds and underworlds and how tragedies transform us into other states. What do you have to say about that?
Thanks for the question, Sarah. Happy anniversary. That's a really beautiful question. I think the idea of the constantly propelled possible world is where transformation happens, and that can exist in the present moment, it can exist in the past, and it can exist in the future. And so for me, I think maybe the closest thing is about submersion, and like in how we can it's almost like when you go swimming and the only way that you're going to stay afloat is by releasing and by sort of allowing yourself to either be fully submerged or be in that in-between state that is trying to gasp for air. And so I feel like that's how we can transform the loss or tragedy or crisis into a different type of experience. I don't know if that makes sense. Do you want to answer that?
I feel like I'm talking too much. Do you want to talk about? Oh, okay, fine. I think that yeah. I mean, yeah. First of all, thanks so much for attending, Sarah. I mean, I think for me, I feel like I kind of talked about this already, but I think just thinking about the underworld as a sort of like architecture or something was important because it was a way of responding to grief in a way that was not purely a state of like self-deletion or passivity or something. Like I think there's a passage in Freud where he says that melancholia is when the self is impoverished, but the grief is when like the world is impoverished. So I think part of it was this sort of determination to re-enrich the world by having this sort of plenitude. So the project in a way is very different from my previous writing, which was much more like conceptual or like pure or something, in that this is just like a ton of like material. It's like constant accretion of material. And so I think there's something about that that was like an attempt to like not fall in love with the world, but have this sort of like stuffness, this like kind of abundance.
Youmna, what would you say is the relationship between the photography that you do and the poetry that you write?
I think it's close to what I was trying to consider earlier, which is like different forms allow for different kinds of answers. And in this case, the photography is not a sort of specific image, but a stilled moving image from a Super 8 film. And so in particular, it's about nostalgia and memory, and about kind of the way photography allows us to really locate our texture for that, for or our desire for nostalgia. And I think what I'm most interested in is the way that a text or an image can live next to each other, rather than how they can sort of characterize one another, or become representations of each other. But really, it's about the relationship between the two kind of existing in the same sphere, in the same world, and what that does when you can sort of simultaneously experience both. How does that open up our relationship to the text? How does that open up our relationship to the image, rather than looking for one to give answers about the other?
Mm-hmm. Would you say that there's a through line or a sort of theme or argument in your book, The Paper Camera?
I was really interested in how a camera can be a flammable object, a kind of impermanent mediation between the self and what the self sees. And so I that happens through the actual process of developing Super 8 film is really beautiful, because not in a kind of nostalgic way, but actually in a really physical way, because there's a lot of accidentals that happen. Like there's burnt edges on the film. The colors don't turn out the way you expect them to. There's something about that materiality that's really similar to writing, and kind of what happens as you kind of try to write through something. So I would say the through line of the book is really like what happens. For me, it was like myself, the camera, the city, and what happens when the camera is this flammable, impermanent object that is trying to mediate my relationship to the city, and to both in terms of past and future.
Yeah, okay, thanks.
Yeah.
Okay, here's something in the chat. Oh, where'd it go? Something about Pinocchio.
Hey, Roberta, it's great to reconnect. We last saw each other at the border, actually, at for this. I think that was the last time we saw each other at for this big delegation that we helped organize. And I haven't actually. I should rewatch, or I should read Pinocchio. But and I like this other question about his underwear or his underwood. But one of the last things I was reading, actually, there's a thing that's kind of like going into the belly of the whale, and I think that's like the same archetype of like being in this sort of like eaten by the Leviathan or something, and the part that I didn't read is about like the whale turns into like a blimp, And so it's trying to like invert this image of this like going into the deepest part of the beast, into like flying in the sky. So I think it's a similar kind of operation of sublimation of some of the other stuff we've been talking about.
And what about the underwear? I'm just kidding. What about, oh, I have kind of a hard time looking at them in the chat here.
It's nice to see a lot of familiar names like Seshu Foster, whose book I just got in the mail, and Mary Berger.
Hi, Mary.
Okay, Mary says, I'm interested in the ways that grief or trauma become this point of dilation for both of you. The way loss propels you into an imaginative extension of what's lost. Yeah.
Thank you. I like that.
Do you have any thoughts on this idea of grief or trauma?
I think you should talk about this too, because I mean that's actually what your thing was about, in terms of about Beirut and like this city exploding.
Yeah.
I mean, the thing I would say is that I think the thing it took me this last year or two to realize is that, I mean, I thought all of this, this whole political historical project was a way of traveling through this grief and dilating it. And I think what I realized in the last year is that it was also, that isn't possibly true. And it is also possible it's a way of dissociating from feeling anything. And it's a way of dissociating from feeling grief. And from feeling. And so this could just be me being a cynical skeptic of like every feeling I have, you know, but I think, you know, I think I wanted to interpret the project in a certain way, but then I realized that maybe I was creating a city that would forever push me away from the actual source of this pain. So I think I had to realize that maybe I had to just travel directly towards that. Do you want to talk about your magic bag?
No, and maybe I can just sort of say that I think for me these words like grief or trauma are related to events, to catastrophe, to time-based kind of continual experiences. And part of the reason I started to work on more speculative projects is because I was very frustrated with the way we talk about the future as like, in the future, it will be Armageddon, right? In the future, the collapse of all that we've known will occur. But the way I understood the world is that it was already happening, that I wasn't sort of awaiting a kind of end of the worldness. So I was more interested in imagining forward a kind of more liberatory, more speculative, as in like returning to the body, not speculating based on the language of finance, speculating based on a real body in real space, and so yeah. So I think for me, this question of like where the turn happens. The turn happens through speculation, through possibility, through kind of always anticipating that line, that like horizon line that is constantly shifting.
This is a good time to start wrapping it up. I imagine you're getting kind of tired.
Yeah.
If there are no more questions from the audience at this point, then maybe I will start to wrap it up. That's all right with you guys?
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay. I'll just mention too that our next event is on April 7th, and that's Brantes Purnell, who is the Poetry Center Mazza writer in residence all next week. So he'll be visiting classes around San Francisco State, and um, he'll be performing here and another public performance. That info is in the chat. And once again, just thanks for coming and hanging out with us, and thanks for everybody in the audience. Thanks for listening. Thanks for your participation as well.
Thank you, Brent.
Yeah,
Thank you, everybody, for being here. It means a lot.
Yeah, thank you all.
Thank you.